Now, there are a whole lot of building blocks here for building effective teams to work together. And I'm not going to go through them in any great detail. We don't have time for that. But I just want to mention that you need to have sound procedures in place for an effective team. You need to have openness, and confrontation doesn't mean conflict. It means being able to take on an issue and confront it. So it's not necessarily a negative thing at all or aggressive, but you need to be open and you need to be able to confront issues when they come up, not leave them. Communication skills are key, of course, both for written, verbal and body language. Support and trust is essential for a good team, but that doesn't happen just by itself. It has to be earned. Trust has to be earned. Regular reviews need to take place. Clear objectives need to be set, and these need to be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, or agreed, I should say, realistic, and with a time scale with them as well. So smart objectives that people understand what it is that is required of them and when. Within a team, you can have smaller groups, and we need to make sure that these groups work well together too, and they don't break off and do their own little thing. We need to engender cooperation, and then we do have to deal with conflict, which, as I may say, is different from confrontation. But conflict, yeah, it does happen, and it's got to be properly managed. Otherwise, it can break a team apart. Everyone needs to have the opportunity for individual development. Otherwise, they won't stay. They won't see what their future is. So it's vitally important for a manager to be looking at the individual development of their team members. We need to balance the roles. We need to think about the social styles. What kind of people have we got in the team? How do they work together? How do they interact? And of course, the manager or the leader the manager themselves has to have good management skills, or if it's a leader building a team below them, they need to have good leadership skills, effective skills. So in building a team, there are a number of stages. So first of all, there's the forming or the storming. This is the brainstorming bit where the team is getting together. They don't know each other necessarily, probably don't know each other well enough necessarily. It was a new team to be able to work well. They take some time to get to the stage where they're performing normally as a team. Each one understands what the others can and can't do, and what's expected of them and what's expected of the others. We then progress to the point where that team performs well. It's delivering the results that are expected. It's an effective working team. We then move to the stage further on down the line where it's called the morning stage, where the team starts to naturally break up. It's done its job. People leave, people move on. So the team starts to break up, and that has to be dealt with properly so it doesn't just disintegrate overnight. And then we get back to the stage then of reforming a new team for a new challenge, and back round again to the new stage. So there is a stage to develop. There are these stages to developing a team, and you cannot get them in the wrong order. You have to follow them in that way. One of the other challenges that you will have when you're managing a team and managing meetings is the different types of people have different influences on the meetings that you have. And we know all these kind of people. I'm just going around very quickly. We have the know-it-all, the person that thinks that you can't tell them anything, and neither can anyone else. They've had loads of experience. There's usually someone who's negative, who's a complainer. There's the one who wants to drive the meeting, even though it's your meeting. They want to drive it for you and take it down their route, the dictator. And then on either side of at the bottom, you see the yes person and the no person. There's one who just agrees to everything, and there's one who says no to everything because that's in their nature to question and to sometimes be a little bit obstructive. At the bottom, you've got the agreeable person who doesn't really drive anything at all, and also on the left, the passive person. And the problem when you've got someone in a group or a team who is very good but is passive is that they will not bring their ideas forward because they're too scared to do so. So it's often worthwhile before any meetings take place that you identify who is going to be taking part in that meeting, how they are likely to behave, and to make sure that everyone contributes equally. And that could sometimes mean getting ideas from people before a meeting as to what they think, so that the passive person has the equal opportunity to have their ideas expressed, because you'll go around the table and ask everybody rather than waiting for the few that will stick up their hands and try and drive the meeting. So moving through some very high level stuff very quickly, I appreciate when it comes then to building your team's international development up. I mean, we could spend a lot of time in this slide. I don't have it. You can either support people, or you can coach them, or you can direct them, or you can delegate them. And the way that you support someone will depend very much on their abilities and their motivation. That's the skill or the will. So if you're wanting to improve someone's performance and they're not performing just the way that you would want to them at the moment, is that because they don't have the skill to do the job, but they have the will? They would like to learn. So in that case, that person could be trained, they can be, or they could be coached to be brought up to a good level of working. If someone's lacking the will, though, that's a different problem, because they could be as intelligent and effective and have the opportunities to contribute, but they don't. So that person is going to need a different type of input to get them motivated to contribute, because they can do the job, they're just not doing it to the best of their ability. So when we're coaching, what does that mean? Well, it's the process of the manager helping someone through direct discussion and activity, working together to learn to solve a problem or do a task better than would otherwise be the case. So that's through practical help. It's through working together. And when you're coaching someone to come up and be more effective, eventually you want to get them to the stage where they can do that job themselves without that external input. But it does mean that you have to spend time with them and set clear objectives. Now, coaching and mentoring and indeed training sometimes get mixed up, but effectively, let's look at the differences between coaching and mentoring. You would coach someone who's normally would be a member of your staff, and it could be somebody that's the same level as you, or it could be you'd be coaching someone underneath you. Mentoring, though, is normally between an experienced person and someone who is up and coming. So it would be that someone who's got 20 years experience in a job helping someone who's new in a job to think about what they want to do. The difference between coaching and mentoring is designed to help that person to reach their own decisions based on the information that you give them. So for coaching, the coach has something to gain or lose in the development of the individual because they're part of that team and they contribute to the team, and the coach is also part of the team. So the coach has an interest in making sure that this person becomes successful, whereas the mentor has nothing directly to gain. Now, obviously, you wouldn't be mentoring somebody if you weren't interested in helping them, but there's no financial gain to be had or no professional development for the mentor. They're doing it for the benefit solely of the mentee. Coaching tends to focus more on job skills, personal skills. Mentoring tends to focus more on long-term skills or life goals. What do you want? Where do you want to be in a few years' time? It's longer term. Coaching is often involved day to day, but the mentor is normally, when I say distant, I mean physically distant, in that they're not there day to day. They don't have day-to-day contact, but they will come back at regular agreed periods to assess how the mentee has been getting on and to see if there's any further input that's required. Coaching is fairly fluid because it has to respond to day-to-day activities, and mentoring tends to be planned because it's longer term. So it doesn't tend to always respond to day-to-day activities, although you have to take experiences into account when you're moving along. But it's a longer term process, so it's more planned. Not going to spend time in this either. I just wanted to highlight this well-accepted GROW model for coaching, which starts out by saying that in order to coach someone, to be able to be effective in their job, you have to establish clarity and clear goals and objectives for what you are going to do. You then move on to looking at the real life situation. What is happening at the moment? Why do they think the way they do think right now? What we might think about what effects do their actions or the activities have on the wider community, the wider group. Then we look at the options that they have for moving forward. What could they do in order to improve their performance? We commit to these actions. Moving down to the bottom now, we commit to these actions and they go and do it. And then we have this session which is called WILL, and it wasn't me that came up with this name, GROW. The W really just is there to fit, I think, to make it a good acronym. And it's the what will you do, and what have you learned, what will you do in future, what worked well for you, what will work better next time, and by the next time we meet, what will you have done? And then you're back to establishing new goals, and so it goes until the person that you are coaching has become proficient in what you're trying to teach them. So, looking at delegation now, delegation is quite misunderstood sometimes, I think, in that the way that you should be looking at delegation is to look at what tasks are you doing just now that someone could do better than you. or at least as well as you. And if you're a manager or a leader and you're spending time and tasks that someone else could do better, or at least as well as you, why are you doing them? Perhaps you should be considering delegating to that individual. If someone can do it more cheaply than you can, or at a lower cost than you can, then if it's not a good, effective way of spending the company's money if you're doing something that someone else could do at better cost, at lower cost. Are you doing something, as we think back to the monkeys example again, that you're doing because you have always done it? Do you have to be the person that needs to do it? Things could change. And lastly, are you doing something that you shouldn't be doing? It's not really your responsibility. And especially, are you doing it because you like doing it? So if you find any of these apply, then you should be considering delegating the tasks to somebody else. But delegation isn't abdication. It's not a matter of just handing a task over and saying, get on with it, because you still have the accountability when you delegate a task to make sure that it's carried out properly and to see that the task is achieved. So the process for delegation is to identify the task that you want to delegate clearly, but it's also to identify the right person to carry out that task based on their skill, based on their will, based on the social styles that they have and their abilities. So get the right person for the right task. Set these SMART objectives in the specific, measurable, agreed. I'll come back to you in just a second. Realistic and time bound. Objectives have to be agreed, because if you set someone an objective that they don't think they can achieve and they don't agree with it, it won't happen. So they will not go away and do what you need them to do if they don't believe that they can. So before objectives are finally set, the person who's going to be carrying out the task has to agree that this is what's going to happen and that they can do it. You need to communicate the parameters, communicate these objectives, lay them down very clearly so that you can refer back to them and know whether they're being achieved or not. They need to be monitored at agreed levels. There is no point in delegating a task to someone and coming back 3 months later and saying, have you done it? You need to be checking as you're going along, 2 weeks down the line, 3 weeks down the line. How are you? What's your progress? Are you on target to achieve this task? And when it's completed, you would get feedback and provide feedback, I should say, to them as to how well that had been achieved and what they could learn and could do better next time. But hopefully, if you've been doing the monitoring as you're going along, that shouldn't be an onerous process, because the task should be completed satisfactorily, because it's not been left to the last minute to see whether or not it was a successful delegation or not. So I wanted to just give you one example in the short time we've got left about one particular study and one particular case for the Practical Commercial Leadership Programme, which is Bilfinger. And in fact, Bilfinger was the reason that this programme came about. Now, you may be familiar with them. They're a multinational oil company. They are involved with asset management, and they have an office in Aberdeen in the north of Scotland. Now, Bilfinger was a client of mine, but they came to me a few years ago and said that they were aware of the fact that their teams on the rigs and onshore had become complacent. The oil and gas industry was in the fortunate position at that time for them that it was a bit of a cash cow. As long as companies were extracting oil, they didn't have to worry about costs too much. They were making huge profits. Even after the financial crisis, they were still making huge profits. And people who were in management positions in the oil companies were not really tasked with being particularly effective. They didn't have to be, because the companies made money anyway. But the Bilfinger directors had the foresight to see that oil and gas was going to be facing harder times. And they wanted to show, well, first of all, they wanted their people to be better than average. But they also wanted to be able to show their clients that their people were better than average. And so they decided the best way to do that was to put these people, all of them, and some of them were very senior and had been around for many, many years, through a leadership and management program. Now, initially, we designed the program for them, but we tailored it later on for the wider world. It was delivered as a 10-day course at that time, and it was so successful that we ended up running it 3 times a year for every year. And we would have 10 managers on the course each time. So we were training 30 managers and leaders per annum over a number of years. At the end, though, they got a certificate to say that they'd completed the course satisfactorily, and they only got it if they did. There was no handing out certificates just for completion. It had to be satisfactory completion. And it was amazing, actually, to see just how important that was to them. They all wanted their certificate. They all wanted to show their own managers, their line managers, that they had done well and what they had learned. But more importantly, Bill Finger went back with these skills and began to build better teams. They produced better results. They cut their costs, which meant they made higher profits. And the company had a very clear objective at that time when it launched this program, to extend its turnover internationally from 200 million to 800 million. And at the time that prior to COVID, they were 3/4 of the way there, which was within the target that they had. So a very successful program indeed, and it led to what we now have as the Practical Commercial Leadership Program. And the emphasis is on practical, because they didn't want a lot of theory that people would forget. They wanted practical examples, practical exercises, things that people would take away and remember. And so this is how we developed the Practical Commercial Leadership Program, and it's in 3 levels. The first is the executive, which, as I've said earlier on, really applies to everybody, and we'll see what the modules consist of in a moment. There are also management core skills, and there are leadership core skills. But the important thing is that the program can be tailored to suit the individual requirements of each business. So although there are core skills, there are many other modules as well that can be attached and added on if they're appropriate. So it's a tailored program, but it has a structure to it. In terms of the personal effectiveness, the core modules that we cover are communication skills, and we look at assertiveness. And we work with people so that they become assertive rather than aggressive or passive. We do carry out an introduction to public speaking, because most people would say that public speaking is one of their key fears. And in actual fact, a survey that was done a few years ago, and to be honest with me, I can't remember exactly who it was. I think public speaking came out as number 3 in people's fears in life, following death and serious illness. Even marriage and moving house, and that's the thing, was all lower down the scale than fear of public speaking. We look at time management, which is extremely important. We look at negotiation skills, which is not just for salespeople, it's for everybody in their day-to-day activities and their interactions with their colleagues and their managers. And we look at influencing skills, positive skills to help people to get their ideas across, and to influence clients as well, to come round to see what it is that they're trying to present to clients. Then we have the management core skills, which were coaching, which we addressed very briefly a few minutes ago. Team building as well. How do you build an effective team? Learning styles. How do people, and we haven't looked at this, but how do people in your team learn? Because people learn in different ways. We look then at informative public presentations. That's a step up from just normal public speaking. How do you deliver an informative presentation effectively to people in your team and to clients? We look at appraisals. What is an effective appraisal? Because appraisals that are carried out badly can be extremely damaging. And we do look at managing conflict. Again, a key area that people are very often not keen to address. But conflict exists, and it has to be effectively managed. Now, from the leadership perspective, the core skills we tend to look at there are the different types of leadership styles, how to motivate people, because you can certainly bring people along with you because of your charisma, but that has to be maintained. So motivation is extremely important, but that also applies to managers. Delegation also applies to managers, but leaders have a particular tendency, because they know where they want to go, is to try and do too much themselves. And at some point, they have to delegate those responsibilities to people working for them so that the company can achieve what needs to be achieved. Then we look at persuasive public presentations, which are different from informative or just standard ones. How do you bring people around to your way of thinking when it's potentially a new idea that you need to bring people on board with? And we also look at critical thinking. Again, we haven't had the chance to look at that today. So that is the Practical Commercial Leadership Program. I know that I've touched on everything very briefly at speed because it was necessary to do so in the time. I had to finish at 11 o'clock. I'm not sure if you've got time for questions. I'll leave it up to you in the studio to say if whether or not, or Rotimi, if you want me to do that, and I'm happy to take them offline later on. But I do hope that that very speedy presentation did actually produce some thoughts for you that you might want to consider further.